Hello and welcome everyone to a new video after a long break as usual. So I decided to make an overview about the Queen's Gambit declined Knight f6 variation, which is the most common, and actually this is also the biggest chapter in our course with Angelica on Chessable, and it can get a little bit confusing, and so I decided to try to make it maybe a little bit easier. We will see whether I succeed or not. So we get into this position. C takes d, bishop g5 is our recommendation. And what is especially tricky in these lines is the placement of white's queen. So I mean, most of the time, every time basically we play e3, bishop d3, knight g2, and short castle. So to those moves, it's easy to remember, but where to put the queen is a real question in some of the lines. So let's see. So for example, there is this bishop b4 line which goes by the name of Gukesh. Gukesh variation is getting somewhat popular. White has a lot of options here, but in our course we recommend queen to b3. So basically, asking the bishop very early on, and the lines are going from this moment, and the placement of the queen is clear. I mean, we want to get the pair of bishops, and it's just about studying the lines after this, which are pretty concrete. So that's kind of easy. There is the move knight d7, which is okay. It's an okay move order, but I would say it's a little bit limits black's options in some sense. So the bishop cannot develop obviously so easily after this move. I mean, we just play e3, and most likely after some bishop e7 or c6, we are going to transpose into some main lines, and we put our queen depending on what of the lines we are going to transpose. So it's knight d7 is kind of easy to handle. So the two main moves and the two moves which are like almost exclusively played at this moment are bishop e7 or c6. Let's say black plays the move bishop to e7. So of course we play e3. So this move is part of our setup, and as in general, whether you play with knight f3 or without, I mean, or this knight g2 plan, what we recommend, it's good to first make this e3 move and just to leave the queen on d1, especially in this case when the bishop goes to e7 first, because c5 can be an annoying move. So just for example, like you play queen c2, castle, e3, very normal, let's say h6, black includes this, and c5. So not c6, just protecting the center, but c5 right away. And these lines are not easy at all, because our queen is not very well placed in this position. So black can continue with moves like knight c6 and putting big pressure on d4. So let's say dc5, it's d4 is even possible. Knight c6, and actually, in my opinion, black is doing pretty well in this position, which would not be possible, this break with the queen on d1 covering d4. So in any case, as I said, we almost there could also be exceptions if I miss something, but in our repertoire in this position, 100% we play e3. So all the time, and okay, now again, black has a couple of options. So e3, for example, prevents bishop f5. So in this case, we take, and the queen goes to b3, very typical motive to win a pawn. So bishop f5 is, of course, not working. So black can play also h6. And basically, if you start with bishop e7 and you don't want to transpose to c6 variations, then early bishop moves or going for some sort of Tartakova setup are the main alternatives. So let's say black plays h6, bishop h4, and now bishop g4. And in such a way, when black is doing it very early, so even before castling or after castling, I mean, in any case, just pretty early without developing the knight and moving this pawn, then our move is queen to c2. So we are not, try to punish black right away, but just in a little bit slower way, because the point is that after queen to b3, black has knight d7, and it's not so good to take on b7. I mean, it's rather bad. So for example, queen b7, rook b8, and black has excellent play. They will take on b2 and just have a great position. It's already better for black. So the key thing here is that the pawn is on c7. So that's important to remember that when black does this thing, bishop g4, planning to sacrifice b7 with the pawn on c7, then we don't go for queen b3 in general, because it's just very, very dangerous to grab this pawn here. One idea is rook b8, other idea is c5, which you can see that, okay, not c6, c5, but pawn can go there right away, so it's very dangerous. So we don't do this. Same goes for immediate bishop g4. We could go queen b3, but again after knight d7 it's not clear, so I just propose queen c2, and saying that this bishop will be eventually misplaced after we go like bishop d3 and sometimes like h3. But also there are some other concrete lines in the course which you will find. So here we go queen c2. That's important, that we don't try to punish right away, but we go queen c2. Yeah, and the other way is, let's say, black castles, then bishop to d3. And for example, if black tries this type of c5 thing, which I showed earlier, with or without h6 doesn't really matter. Here we can just take, and very nicely placed queen on d1, which is very well positioned against d4. So we can, for example, this could be a try to simplify the position, but of course with this line we are just winning the queen, so not possible. And the queen is c2 would be just bad, and now the rook is coming rather to c1, and we have stronger control over d4. So that's normally not what black does, but okay, black can play, for example, h6, bishop h4, knight d7. So this is when black wants to go for the Tartakova type of play. Then we go knight g2, and once again, once we enter the main line of this thing, then it's very natural to put the queen on c2. I mean, there is absolutely no reason to put it on d2. Same I can say about b3 or a4. So like here, really the queen goes to c2, rooks are coming to the middle, like very, very standard play. It's, I would say, easy to remember if black plays in the most optimal way in this setup. And otherwise, if black does something not very correct move order, so for example not including h6 very early, like knight d7, then we can just go knight g2, b6, and I believe very interesting knight g3, which you will also find in the repertoire. So now the queen just stays on d1, ready to join the attack, on the king side anytime. So that's against the Tartakova. So if black is completely precise with early h6, then we just put to c2 where else, and otherwise we keep it on d1 and it can join the attack. But yeah, this setup is not too popular, I have to say. So yeah, I guess that's more or less it with if black wants to play independently with bishop e7, so I can normally say c6 happens to protect d5. Again, we go e3. So yeah, 99% of the time I would say we go like this unless some very bad move happens, Of course, if black goes like h6, we can immediately win a pawn or something, then we don't go e3, but otherwise we do. So c6, we play e3. This is kind of the most common position of this knight f6 line, and black has different moves. So for example, if bishop f5, then we go queen to f3. So this is one of the exceptions, when the queen is not going obviously to c2 or b3, but since the bishop cannot be normally protected, we can basically force a double pawns on f6, like whether it's queen f6 or gf. I mean, queen f6 is much better, of course. Then we just have this endgame, and we clearly solved the problem of where to put the queen because it's not on the board anymore. So yeah, we just play this slightly better endgame. So that's about bishop f5. But we have to know black can also do this, of course, with including h6. We go away, and then bishop f5, same, queen f3 is happening. So yeah, that's about bishop f5, and there are basically the setups with bishop d6, which black can start with h6 or bishop d6 right away. And that's one thing to remember, that against bishop d6 setups, we play with queen c2. So no matter if black starts with h6 or bishop d6, we play with queen c2. Main reason is just not to learn two different variations. Because let's say like h6, bishop h4, bishop d6, bishop d3, castles, knight g2, for example, and knight d7, let's say, or rook e8 and queen c2. So this is one way to reach this position, and other way, which is, I believe, the more logical from black, not to include h6 too early. They just go bishop d6, we go bishop d3, they go castle, and okay, we could go knight g2 or knight f3, both are fine, but if you play queen c2, I mean the pawn on h7 is hanging. Black has no other way to protect it than h6. Of course, knight d7 we can still take the pawn because of the pin. So, and this will eventually lead to the same position. So what you have to remember here is that if black plays with bishop d6, we always play with queen c2 setup in order to to kind of mix. Not mix is the good word, I believe, but to study these two separate lines together, because then these are just transposing to each other, whether black starts with h6 or bishop d6. So that's about bishop d6, and okay, the two main moves for black are h6 and bishop e7. So h6 is the recently popular move. Let's start with this one. Of course, we go bishop h4, bishop e7, bishop d3, let's say castles, and knight g2. So again, how to remember to this thing? I believe that when h6 is happening, if you remember for the thing that we pretty much never play queen c2, it's already a very good start, because simply there is no need to play queen c2. Like the pawn is not gonna be under attack, and many times the queen can be misplaced on the c file when black's counterattack is coming on the queen side, or the queen is needed to d2 in order to protect e3 and help with f3. So here, absolutely no need to put the queen on c2 anymore. So let's see what options black has at this moment. Okay, let's start with the exception. You know that there is always some exception. That's pretty normal, I would say. So there is this line, kind of favorite of Carlsen, when black is going early knight e8 with the plan of bringing the knight to d6. Here we go bishop g3. So we are not trading at this moment. Black goes knight d6 with ideas of bishop f5. But once we see that with ideas of bishop f5, then okay, now queen c2 is a completely different thing. So of course it's not about attacking h7 where there is nothing, but about stopping this bishop f5 or knight f5 move from black, and then we go from there, short castle and so on, playing for f3. And you can find many lines in the course after this. So this is the one exception where we actually put the queen on c2, but it's very logical because we just have to guard this f5 square in this case. And in all the other cases, so for example, knight e7, we castle. Let's say black goes knight h5, we take e7, queen e7. And this is a very good example that why we don't play queen c2 too early, because our goal is to play f3 and e4. What do we need for that? We need a protected pawn on e3. And okay, the queen is protecting the pawn from d2 and not from c2. So here we play queen d2. Black normally plays knight b6, and we can play f3. So the pawn is protected. We are ready to push. And black either allows it or stops it with f5, for example. And then we just go rook a to e1. And yeah, I mean, again, this is very good that the queen is not there, because our standard plan in such position is to play b3. Maybe it's not the correct color for it. So b3, remove the bishop to b1. Not queen is not in the way on c2. Then we play knight to c1, knight to d3, and knight to e5. So that's the standard plan. And basically, if you just know this against knight h5, that when it happens, again, I would say almost always the queen goes to d2 because the pawn needs protection on e3. Queen has nothing to do on c2. I mean, not much at the very least. So this is knight d7. Black can immediately go knight to h5. Here we take in e7. And again, here, if you just don't remember theory, but you just remember that if black goes for this exchange maneuver of knight h5, queen d2 is always good. There is no exception, really. Like, the queen just goes to d2, protects the pawn. We castle, rook e1, very similar things, just what I have shown before. Okay, in the course, we recommend different move, but if you forget it, it's fine. The main thing is just to know that, this pawn needs protection. You go for the standard plan. You cannot be wrong. So that's immediate knight h5. Okay, and rook e8, let's say this is kind of the most common move. And again, like, we have one more move before deciding the placement of the queen, so to say. So we just castle at this moment. And okay, black doesn't have a huge choice at this moment. It probably has to develop the knight or play knight e4. Of course, if he plays knight e4, then it again solves our problem of the queen, because we can just trade, play knight g3, and then undermine black's position with f3. And okay, we didn't have to make a choice apparently with the queen, so it's not so good. There is a move like a5, which is like very rare, but quite interesting, because okay, now we obviously don't want to play a4 with the knight ready to jump to b4. And in general, we don't want to play queen c2, when black has a counterplay with b5 and eventually at some moment with c5. So that's not what we want. So here, again, we just stay with the queen on d1. So there is no reason to to move the queen. And okay, for example, rook c1 is our recommendation in the course, just a very nice waiting move. So in case black goes with b5, the rook is much better to prevent black's play on the queen side than the queen would be. So in such cases, normally we just go like king h1, f3, and if you really want to put the queen somewhere, it should be on d2. But keeping it on d1 for a while is just completely fine. Anyway, this a5 is a rare move, so knight e7 is kind of the main line, of our course, and here a4 is our recommendation. So the point is that in case of queen c2, black can play this line should b5, a5, bishop a6, and have decent counterplay on the queen side, and from the queen side towards the center against our f3, e4 play. So yeah, here we have this a4 move. Again, queen stays on d1. We just prevent b5, and yeah, okay. Regarding how the game goes, it depends where we will put our queen, but it's not really gonna be c2 once again. So let's say black plays bishop d6, then we can play king h1 just to get out of bishop h2 tricks, and on a5 we play queen c1, for example. Much more logical to protect the pawn and go f3, e4 idea. I mean, if you want to remember something extra, that the reason that we don't play queen d2 is just not to allow any this knight e4 jumps. I guess it's right away it's not working yet, but it can be dangerous, to allow some trading maneuvers on the bishop and the queen. So rather just queen c1, no problems whatsoever. e4 is idea, f3 is idea. So we just go like this, and in case of knight h5, once again, position is different, but ideas are the same. We just trade and we play, okay, let's say a5 is like recommended, but it doesn't really matter. The main thing is that the queen has nothing to do on c2, but it goes to d2, protect the pawn, then the rook is coming, knight is going to c1, pawn is fully protected, and then we go for our usual play. So that's about it, more or less. So yeah, so here in this way, this is kind of the main line when black plays with h6 at some moment. Before we could actually play queen c2 with the bishop on g5. You will see what is the difference. So yeah, in this case, some h6. Then the only exception is Carzen's line with knight e8 d6 when we put the queen on c2. Otherwise, queen either remains here if we trade the bishops, queen goes to d2, and yeah, we have other useful moves to make in the meantime to prepare e4. So okay, what else here? I guess nothing. So we can move on to the last variation, which is bishop e7 right away. Of course, we do our usual move, bishop d3. And again, black has this bishop g4, this early bishop move, which for some strange reason is pretty popular online. So the difference, you have to understand it here, that this move is tends to be good with the pawn on c7 and tends to be pretty bad with pawn on c6. And the reason for that is that after queen b3, let's say black castles, we can, in this case, easily take this pawn, because after knight d7, the queen doesn't have to, escape just with one pawn, but we can just take one more. So that's the big problem for black, and it's it's not only a pawn, which is extremely important. It also goes out from this rook b8, rook b2. d5 is also a problem. Black cannot challenge our center with c5. So it's really, the whole different story with the pawn on c6. So we are actually threatening big time to take on b7 and then on c6. So yeah, this combination of c6, bishop g4 very, very rarely works for black. It's better to go something like queen b6 to protect the pawn, but then we drop back to c2. This idea is also worth knowing, because now the queen is completely misplaced here. The bishop can be unprotected. So for example, if you castle, then in some version you can lose this pawn. For example, we can take there or on f6 and take the pawn. And another idea is that if you go h6, that's claiming that everything is fine. Then we just play bishop h4, and let's say if black castles, then the whole point of bishop g4 is gone, because that square is attacked 2 times. So we can just win a pawn in case black decides to try to trade the bishop. I mean, it's simply not possible. So yeah, that's one thing to remember, that bishop g4 c6, then queen goes to b3. So other move is knight d7, let's say knight g2. Of course, black can again go knight h5, bishop e7, queen e7. Once again, knight h5 happened. The position is a little bit different. Pawn is not on h6, but on h7. Queen d2 is good. In this case, queen c2 is also good. So queen c2 is actually the course. So that's our recommendation. But queen d2 can never be good. So if only you know this, that knight h5 we play with queen d2 protection, castle, rook e1, and so on. That's already enough. And actually, last summer when we updated the course, somehow one line, was somehow not imported to Chessable, because there was already this feeling of me and Angelica as well, that we have to make it a little bit more clear. So why to go queen c2 here if you don't do it normally? So there is this interesting move, queen b1. So for the next update of the course, we would like to put this as a main line, I believe. So it's just an interesting extra option, when the pawn is on h7. With the pawn on h6, this move makes 0 sense. But here it makes quite a lot of sense. So black cannot castle, first of all, because of this pressure, and white also wants to play b4. And black has to solve one of the problems. Okay, of course, protection of h7 can be solved in many ways, h6, g6, knight f6, and so on. Let's say g6, then we can go for minority attack. So it's a little bit different, but I would say quite interesting plan. And if black, first stops b4 and then says, okay, later I can deal with the king side, it's actually not so easy, because there is g4, excellent move, knight f6 and h3. So, and black king has some problems. Long castle is pretty much out of real options because of this pawn on a5. You just cannot castle like that. And castling short is also pretty risky, because white has g5 options, and we can very easily go for long castle. So I believe this queen b1 deserves attention. Basically unplayed, or 1 or 2 games played with this move, just because the pawn is on h7 and we have this extra idea. But again, if you don't know this, or you forgot, or you don't want anything, you can even ignore the course with queen c2 at this moment and just go for queen d2 and play like nothing happened. So some other line, if black goes with knight f8 early on, castle knight g6, castle knight g6. Black has the idea of playing h6, kind of trapping our bishop to a trade. In such cases, of course, there is a lot of sense to play queen c2. like, of course, c5 is not coming, queenside play is not coming with the knights over there, and this way we prevent h6 by taking on f6, and then g6 is gonna hang. So this is again one logical way to play with queen to c2. So knight g2 short, or okay, I entered it in another move order. So let's say short castle, knight g2, knight bd7, castle. So yeah, this is the first thing to do, just to develop minor pieces, castle, and then okay, when rook e8. So in this particular position, when even in this position, black would still, transpose into those lines what I showed earlier, that h6, bishop h4, they go rook e8 and we go a4. But if they start with rook e8 here we can play queen c2, because no more transposition with h6 is available for our opponent, because on h6 we simply go bishop f4. And now the point is, all these tricks with knight h5, knight takes d5, cd, bishop c7, winning the queen. So basically, black plays something like knight f8, but again, then there is no queenside play, and we are just gonna play rook d1 and prepare for f3, e4. So that's the reason we can play queen c2 in this case if there is no h6, that on h6 we can remove the bishop to f4, and with the help of the queen we have this trick to not allow black to get the pair of bishops after knight h5. So yeah, and what could make the course easier if, so first of all, it's very good thing that let's say after h6, bishop h4, rook e8, this a4 had like 10 games or something when we made the course, and now it's almost like the main line. So that's already a very good sign that this move seems to work pretty well. But what could be maybe the next step, and that would be a huge step for the course, if a4 would be a good move here. And it's not really tested. It's a little bit, I mean, it's definitely a worse version somewhat for white. The question is how much worse. So the reason is that with h6 and bishop h4, the bishop is closer to the retreat square of f2, which is like really nice in order to support the e4 break, and getting out of all of these knight g4 tricks. So therefore h6 bishop h4 is an extra good thing for white. And the other thing, which may be even more relevant, that without h6 the knight can go towards to g6. So that's the other thing which a little bit influences this whole thing. Then the bishop on g5 may be getting traded on h6, and it's not that comfortable over there. So I mean, this could be a possible update of the course if we can find some possible improvement. But if not, till that time, I mean, I have no problems with queen c2. But regarding remembering lines, a4 would make things much easier. But here I am in favor of just playing queen c2 with the pawn on h7. It makes a different story than with h6. So that black wants to play with a5, b5, and the knight on d7 is quite nice, supporting c5. Many times it can jump like b6, c4. But with the queen on c2, and attacking on h7, this is the main line, and the knight goes away from the queen side, and all the play over there is getting slower. So we just play f3, then rook b1, bishop h4, and so on, and play for e4. And as you can see in the course, I believe white has good chances here. So yeah, I mean it's a lot of variations, a lot of options, but I mean I hope I made it at least somewhat more clear with this video, and like this opening will be like again one topic for the planned update in this summer, because yeah, it's quite big, it's quite popular, and you know, quite many different move orders. But if you just remember a couple of things, then even not following our repertoire, like move by move, shouldn't be a problem, because you just know some basic ideas, and that should be good enough, I would say. All right, so I hope this video will be somewhat useful for you, and hope to see you in some video in the future. Thanks for watching.